Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Gerber, Denominational Minister for Youth and Young Adults for Mennonite Church USA, and also the editor of The Gathering Place, which can be found at www.thegatheringplace.us. The Gathering Place is a new and interactive website for Anabaptist youth leaders to learn, be, and connect. And every month we go ahead and we talk about a different theme, and everything that we do hinges along that theme. And this month in February, we've been talking about contemporary Anabaptist witness. What does peacemaking look like today? And for this webinar today, I'm so excited to have Dirk Eitzen with us, who is professor at Marshall College, and he's here talking with us today about today's media and violence simulation and desensitization, and what in the world, how does this media viewing impact our youth and our children, and especially as it relates to their faith development. And so, Dirk, welcome to The Gathering Place. We're so excited to have you today. And Dirk sent me some questions for us to get started. And I think just to sort of get the ball rolling, I would like us to as we answer these questions, introduce yourself, introduce where you come from, and what maybe interests you about coming and attending this webinar today, as well as the question of what do you see folks doing and enjoying regarding media, and also what are your greatest concerns as it relates to youth and media, including media violence. So I'd just like to open up the floor for us to get started with that, and then Dirk's going to jump in here and give us some context to talk about, and we'll continue the conversation. So who would like to get us started? Clayton, you're first in line, so I'm gonna call on you.
All right. Sorry, I had to find the unmute button. So reflecting on the questions that were before us, I should introduce
yourself, yeah.
Yeah, I'm Clayton Gladish. I'm one of the pastors at Heston Mennonite Church. I work often with youth and young adults, and so I find myself very attracted to this conversation, as it's a conversation we've had as a group, thinking about video games, and especially to do with violent video games. Some guys wondering, is it okay to play these? A lot of them just kind of gravitate towards them because they've got this sort of inner sense that this is what guys should do, and so kind of wrestling with this sense of how does this fit with our faith? How does it fit with this idea of peacemaking and nonviolence that we talk about on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights? Is it okay to engage in games and even movies? What kind of entertainment is okay? And I tell them, it's not something that's easy to discern. Where do you draw the line? Do you draw the line at Mario Kart, or do you draw the line at a first-person shooter? We have to discern these sorts of things. And so I share their concerns and their questions, and look forward to some of the discussion today.
Thank you. Thank you. Jane, I have you next in line. Oh, just unmute yourself first, and then you can talk with us. There you go.
All right. I'm Jane Yoder-Short from Kelowna, Iowa. I'm just an MYF sponsor at West Union Mennonite Church. We've been doing a series produced by MCC on Ben's story, he was in Fallujah, and so we've been talking a lot about military and how that intersects with faith. And as one of the side conversations, we have also been talking about video games and becoming desensitized to violence. And so I'm just really anxious to hear how you help youth sort out what's appropriate and what really crosses the line and desensitizes.
Thank you. Glad to have you here. Randy, what about you?
Okay, so actually the reason I wanted to be part of this is because in 2.5 weeks I was asked to speak at a church in Eastern Ohio about technology. I I think they more want to focus on social media and those kind of things, but just technology in general. Things to think about as believers, especially Anabaptist faith. How does it resonate? Does it contribute or not contribute to community? Does it hinder community? So I'm just here just to kind of listen, just get another perspective and learn. So
We're glad you're here. Welcome, welcome. Shannon, Shannon, can you talk at all, or are you still muted? She still can't hear. Okay, so feel free to maybe write your question, and I'll move to Shanna here, and then I can read your stuff. Does that sound good? Okay, Shanna, welcome.
Hello, I'm Shanna Peachy Bushhart. I'm Conference Minister for Christian Formation for Central Plains Mennonite Conference. I'm based here in Kelowna, Iowa, and I just wanted to be a part of the conversation to see, kind of to keep in touch with what other leaders are thinking, what the issues are that are in your context. So I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here too. And while Shannon is writing a little bit, I will just also say that I not only am curious about this to be able to equip and resource our youth leaders in the denomination, but also as a mother. I'm a mother of 3 boys, and my oldest is 9 right now, and we're definitely moving into the Xbox games. And even though we've been able to sort of keep him kind of within the parameters of, NCAA, Madden, sort of the sports games like that, when he goes to friends' homes, there's Halo, there's other things like that. And, how do we have informed conversations without just like laying down the hammer? How do we help him to think critically, as well as to think, what comes into our senses has the power to filter down into our hearts and minds too. So how to think through that. So I'm curious on a personal level as well. Shannon writes here that she's the youth director at First Mennonite in Bluffton, Ohio, and she wrote a paper about this topic in college and more of the psychological effects, and is interested in the faith aspect of it. I'm excited. Well, we're excited, very excited to have you too. Well, I think we all are coming from the same theme of a lot of interest as far as what in the world does our media, and how does it impact our youth, and to what extent does viewing violence, how does it kind of get within us and change us? So, Dirk, we're so happy to have you here today, and want to take it from there?
Well, I'm happy to be here. Yeah, this is a really complicated topic. It's difficult, in fact, to know where to begin. So I pulled out five facts, I call them, that I think are often, they speak to some pretty common misunderstandings and some concern or fear that's perhaps not necessary or. Well, let me just begin by saying that as a starting point, if there is one takeaway, it's that in a healthy context, the dangers are overstated. Kids are very resilient. There is kids will gravitate to things that they enjoy, and generally in a healthy context use them in a healthy way. So there are no huge worries. The concerns, particularly with youth, have more to do with making good choices and trying to create a healthy environment. As Clayton was talking, it occurred to me that there's, I'll call it fact 0, before any of the others, and that is that it's remarkable that people look at things, entertainments that they like, Mortal Kombat, Doom, video games, movies, and they say, oh, I like it so that it can't be harmful. And conversely, people look at things that they find abhorrent or frightening, horror movies and video games, and they say, oh, I don't like those, so they must be harmful. But it's so people think what they like is harmless and what they don't like is harmful, but that's not necessarily the case. Now, I have some slides to help me walk through these points. And I think, can you see my cursor move, by the way? No?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Okay,
We can do
good.
it.
Well, I'm just going to walk through these. I don't. I'll try to do it kind of briskly. These are slides that I actually made for an academic presentation. Some of them don't speak exactly to what I'm going to be talking about here. But the first point, fact one, people are often confused about what violence is. So down here in the lower right, this is Grand Theft Auto. When you watch it, it's a pretty horrific game with lots of overstated violence. And if a parent walks in a room and sees a child playing Grand Theft Auto, they're often shocked and chagrined, and they say, that's violent. You shouldn't be doing that. But in fact, it's not violent. It's playing a video game. Seeing violence on the screen, thinking about violence, entertaining violence, that's not the same thing as violence. People, including scholars who study violence, often make a mistake in connecting aggression too closely with violence. This woman here in the upper left-hand corner is clearly mad as blazes. She's expressing her anger. She seems aggressive, but anger is fine in some situations. It's helpful. Jesus got angry when he overturned tables in the temple courtyard. So anger is not violence. Watching violence is not violence. Now, these two women in the lower left-hand corner, they're gossiping. Malicious gossip can actually be intended to harm, and that's what violence is. Violence is action that's intended to harm somebody else. So gossip, malicious gossip, can actually be harmful. And here, hidden behind Grand Theft Auto, is some folks playing hockey. I don't play hockey. I don't know much about it, except I have been told by acquaintances who do that sometimes hurting folks is done intentionally as part of the game strategy. Well, if so, that's violent. On the other hand, rough sports are not necessarily violent. But in a game like hockey, violence can easily, aggression, rough play can shade into violence. So that's something to think about. Fact two. What the scientific literature shows, a whole mass of scientific literature, is that there is a very clear correlation between high engagement in violent entertainments of all kinds and antisocial behavior. So I don't know if you can see these statistics on your screen. They're kind of small, but aggression and bullying, delinquent behaviors, problems in school, theft, imprisonment, and all sorts of other ways, there is this connection. But it's a correlation. It's folks who say, who read from this, the danger that these video games, violent video games or violent movies, can cause violence. That's actually not quite right. What you can say is that there is a systemic connection. So, for example, rough kids are more prone to be violent and more prone to get into trouble. Or people who are antisocial kids who are maladapted, kids who have trouble in school, may retreat to violent entertainments as a distraction. So there's no question that there is a systemic connection between entertaining violence and doing violence. That's something to be cautious of, but it's not something to... the causal connections are complicated and indirect. There are, because the psychological literature is complicated, it's difficult to make out, and there are some psychologists who do this research who are actually, I think, confused. They tend to draw they're called effects researchers, and because what they're looking for is effects between causal effects, they tend to, when they look, they find them. What I can say is clear is that there are two psychological mechanisms involved in violent entertainments. One is what's called a priming effect. When you imagine anything, what you're actually doing is sort of rehearsing this in your brain and body. So, for example, when you see a gun, actually your motor cortex, little neurons of your trigger finger, can light up because that's part of how we understand what a gun is. When you are I recall once going to a movie that had brainy sharks attacking people, and after I came out of the movie, I was surprised to find that my thigh muscles were all burning and tense, because the whole time I'd been watching this movie, I had been trying to lift my feet off the floor so they wouldn't get taken off by this brainy shark. That's just the way we respond to the way we interpret our surroundings. Priming effects means that we are prepped for this sort of response, for action in the real world, and these effects linger for a short time. And so, for example, desensitization, that word came up, that's actually a priming effect. The thing is about priming, it's really fairly short term. That is, we're primed for a specific situation. When you play Grand Theft Auto and you get into your car, you might actually see people who are crossing the street as, oh, look, there's a person I could run over. It doesn't mean you're going to do it, but that crosses your mind because you've been primed to think that way on account of playing the game. After a short time, that you're primed for going to the grocery store or whatever else it is that you're doing, and so that wears off. Longer-term effect is learning. So when you play a lot of Xbox, you get really good with the controller. That's a learned skill. In the same way, there is a concern that playing a lot of a game like Call of Duty will teach you that the military is exciting or fun. That is the concern, that's something that you will learn from the game. So when you're thinking about the effects of these games, if you're interested in the psychology of it, priming and learning are the two mechanisms that come into play. So the third point that I wanted to make is that when you look at studies of actual violence, this is psychological studies, criminological studies, sociological studies, studies of all kinds, they show that actual violence does not in fact stem directly from violent impulses or from aggression. Much of the research supposes that it does. So when you watch a violent movie, you get violent ideas, and that increases your likelihood of behaving in a violent fashion. That there is some truth that without the violent impulses, you're not going to behave in a violent way. But actual violence stems from a failure of self-control, of inhibition, of empathy. When violence occurs, it's not, and these are things that ordinarily, this yellow barrier, little kids are prone to hit and bite, and as they grow up, as they mature and learn self-control, and as they're taught about self-control, they learn to rein in their violent impulses. Teenage boys, as everybody knows, sometimes have a problem in the self-control area. This is something that they need to learn. Self-control is learned through practice. So interestingly enough, if you want someone to learn to control their violence, the way is not by completely putting them in a rubber room where they're never exposed to violence, but in fact reflecting on violence and thinking about it and imagining it in ways that allow them to test out ideas, to learn self-control. Self-control is something that is learned. I was also going to mention the problem with online gaming. The way that people learn about proper social behavior is through social interactions, real social interactions, face-to-face interactions in the real world. So if you're next to a bunch of guys playing Halo in a room and somebody does something or says something offensive, there will be a conversation there and you can see the impact that it's had. Social media shields people from that kind of response. They don't recognize, because they don't get any direct feedback from the real world, they don't see the impact of their interactions, that that can encourage more thoughtless, more uninhibited, more harmful behavior. And so if you want to teach nonviolence, the face-to-face social interactions are always better than these sort of remote interactions. Fourth point, play. Playing of all kinds is indispensable for healthy social development. And play, kids learn resilience, how to bounce back from injury and insult. They learn social skills. They learn self-confidence, self-control, empathy. When you're playing backyard football and somebody gets hurt, you learn how to respond, how to take care of them. You learn what kinds of actions cause harm. You learn what kinds, when you get hurt, how to respond to the situation. So there's play, even rough and tumble play, has benefits. When we look at backyard football, because the kids are playing outdoors, it's social, they're running around and getting good exercise, people tend to think, parents tend to think, oh, now this is a good kind of activity. I have 3 sons, and the only broken bone we've ever had is when one of them got broke a collarbone playing backyard football. So it is not, just because it's fun doesn't mean that it's harmless. This judgment of what's acceptable is a social judgment. Now, I've substituted in the next image an image of Halo. When you look at this, you say, oh my goodness, that's not like playing outdoors. It's not exercise. It's not social engagement, and therefore it's not worthwhile. It's harmful. But you have to recognize that at the bottom, a game is a game. There's potential here, even though it appears to be violent, for positive social interaction. It's not what's depicted on screen itself. It's not so much the nature of the activity as the context for the activity. Game play of all kinds. And by the way, movies, comic books, video games, these are forms of play. Storytelling, imagination, these are one of the ways in which humans play. These stories are one way to test uncomfortable ideas in a safe space. So you don't want to actually hit somebody or do boxing, but watching movies about such things allow you to imagine the consequences, imagine the hurt, to feel the excitement. It's a way of processing these kinds of social interactions in a safe space, including potentially harmful interactions. So play is indispensable. Play is necessary. Not all play is healthy, but we can't do without it. The final point, you're not going to be able to make sense of any of those words on the screen, so I should probably not even put this up there. I will go back to me. Hang on, I've got to figure out how to do this.
We could read those words on your.
Yes, but they're misleading. They're misleading.
Oh, okay.
Gotta find me. There. Can you see me?
I see you.
The most important point is this. We shape the world we live in. Used to. I mean, all creatures do this. Termites make mounds, cows make poop, and people are unique in the ability to decide how they're going to shape their social environment. Youth tend to think, well, they're very solipsistic. They're very into themselves. They're social creatures, of course, but they don't tend to think about the social consequences of their behavior. So when the MYF at a lock-in, for example, when a couple of the guys go off and play a video game by themselves, a violent video game, that has an impact on the whole group. They're shaping the whole MYF interaction, not just their own. So that's perhaps the most important takeaway, that the decisions that we make have an impact on our environment. They have an impact on the people around us, and that's something to think about whatever kind of entertainment we're involved in. So those are the 5 points that I wanted to make. Violence is not the same thing, or engaging in violent games is not violence. Aggression is not violence. There is a correlation between engagement in violent entertainments and actual violent behavior, but actual violence doesn't come from violent impulses, which we all have. It comes from the lack of self-control. Self-control is something that can be practiced and learned. Play is critical. We need to do it. And the trick is to find healthy context for play in which violent entertainments, if kids are having fun doing that, that's channeled in healthy directions. And finally, whatever we do, we need to think about the impact that our behavior has on other people and on the world, and on ourselves. We are shaping the world we live in. So that was a long-winded lecture, and now I'll stop.
It's very interesting, and a lot to absorb. I am curious as far as what did you hear Dirk say, and what grabbed hold of you? What open it up for discussion? Any responses to these 5 facts that Dirk laid out for us?
Well, I am the mother of 3 grown sons. They're all, the oldest is 30 now, and I have been through this kind of soul-searching. What do we let them play? Why am I letting them play Halo? At what age is it okay? And all of that. And right at the beginning, Dirk, as you were talking about how in a healthy environment, it's okay. It's not always bad to be playing, these, violent video games. I can't remember how you put it, but I guess like here at the end, you were saying the trick is to find healthy contexts for play, and I feel like as a parent, I was kind of frozen up and not and taking this very seriously and not really knowing how to talk about this. And I just find this extremely helpful because you lower the stakes for us as parents and youth leaders. That it's really important. It's good for youth to be engaged in these questions and in these activities, as long as they're doing it thoughtfully, as long as they understand the difference between violence and those other things. So I just find this very helpful, very clarifying.
Halo is an interesting game because kids play it in groups. And social play is, I think, people learn a lot through social play of all kinds. Solitary play, if kids, that's fun, it's a nice escape, but if kids are spending a lot of time in solitary play, that's often a sign of trouble in the real world, trouble engaging with other people. So that is something to be nervous about. And Halo can be played in solitary mode too. And there are games like Call of Duty that I think it's hard for me, frankly, to imagine a social context in which such a game is healthy.
And is that because of just the sheer violence, or because of the simulation of war? What gives you pause for that?
I have a bunch of clips, which when you guys run out of questions or things to say, I will show them to you, and you can tell me what you think about these clips. Things that I'm sure that your youth in your congregation have seen or know about, or have friends that do them, or involved in themselves. So Call of Duty is one of those. When you see it, you recognize that it's not just the gameplay. The gameplay itself, when you look at a game like Halo, and you see, do you want to see a clip of Halo so you can understand what I'm talking about? Would you like that?
Yeah, sure. Randy?
Well, I was going to say, I've seen bits and pieces of Halo, but sure, let's see it.
This is...
Okay, well, I suppose everyone sort of signed off here on watching some amount of violence. If not, just turn off your screen for a moment if you're uncomfortable. All right.
Halo, let me see. From 10 seconds in. I won't show much.
7:20, running Halo 5. Freddie was actually able to get in touch with Microsoft to get us some early builds to show you guys. So this is democracy, isn't it? Wow, it's really nice. Dude, come on. You can't do this. Oh, good. Oh, good. Yeah, just come from behind. Oh, good. That's great. How about this? Give me this. Charge it up. He still hasn't seen it. He has no idea. Hey. Oh, yeah. That's a title. At least I killed him, too. Okay, really? What are you, 12? Get out of here, bro.
We ought to be tolerant of those who worship a different god than
Okay,
us.
let me see how to stop the tape.
All right, what do we got going on?
Stop.
Disagree with the president.
Hang on, I'm trying to come back to the real world here.
March into these
Oh,
countries
my.
based on some fundamentalist religious principles, drop a few bombs,
Here we are.
dictator, and start a
How to make it
democracy.
stop. Can you see me? Why can't I make that thing
Yes.
stop?
Let me see here.
I
There
can
you
see
go.
you now.
What did I do?
I don't know.
What did I do? There we go.
There we go.
Whew. Got into more violence there than I intended to. Well,
So-
anyway, so
so
that...
I have a thought. I mean, as I was listening to that, I mean, I assume some of the commentary in the background was the game itself, right? 'Cause
Yeah, the guy who was talking about, sneaking up, charging it up, the guy who was laughing and having a jolly time, yes, he's the game player.
Well, but also, like, some of the comments to me almost could be as profound effect as the action involved, because the one was talking about we need to get rid of anyone that's not the same religion as us. Another one said something to the effect of he disagrees with our president, so we have to get rid of him, or something like that, right? So
Oh, I see. There was a problem. That audio that was running, somehow I had different tabs put up, and one of the tabs was Call of Duty. This one that I suggested to you is dangerous and horrific. That's what you were hearing about the religions and the presidents.
okay.
The one from Halo, he was just saying, "Oh, charge him up. What are you, 12?" You know, he was making these sort of he was laughing and making jovial comments about killing the other dudes on screen. So that audio confusion, that's my fault. I'm sorry. But the Halo commentary, while violent, was all jovial and good-natured.
And that was said by the players themselves, not by the game, right?
The players themselves. So, what did you think of what you saw on the screen? Is that horrific?
Well, I'd be curious to know what you think effect-wise, like qualitative effect between participants and playing paintball. Like to actually have a gun in your hands and going around and shooting other people with paint. Would that even have more of a profound effect than getting behind a joystick or something?
Yeah, is playing paintball, I've never done it. Is it violent?
That's what I'm asking.
Does it, when people do it, are they intending to hurt each other, or is it just good-natured?
It'd be more good-natured. It's sort of along the same lines of a water gun. I mean, really, what's the difference between a water gun shooting? I mean, except you've got paintballs that sting. I mean, they do sting.
What about but it's still a simulated activity, right? I mean, in the wrong hands, it feels like it could be something that someone, oh, that's interesting, the effect of paint gun. I mean, does their mind go to the place? What other effects could shooting someone have?
I feel like it falls into that category of playing football in the yard, where there are real people, your friends, your peers, and you're in this milieu where you're making judgments about what is fair, what is, and like with paintball, you do have the element of stinging. People can get welts from them, so you have to decide how close range am I gonna shoot someone, my peer. So all those social judgments that Dirk was talking about that I find would be good practice for this, good practice for self, impulse control, self-control, that type of thing. So just making the argument that it's probably not so detrimental. I don't know, what do you think, Randy?
Well, it just I get the idea about we need to practice in order to be able to restrain ourselves. I get that. I mean, you don't know how to respond nonviolently unless you're given the opportunity to practice responding nonviolently. But like when you were presenting, Dirk, I was thinking about, I don't know if you've ever read much of Henry Nouwen, and his book in Creative Ministry talks about, like, even in teaching, things that we don't intend to do can have violent consequences, right? So even if I'm playing paintball and I'm practicing this, but it can cause violent responses in other people. Yeah, I don't quite see it as, maybe you're not saying it's a neutral activity. I don't quite see it as a neutral activity.
I think we need to respect any choice that parents need to make. When my boys were young, we didn't have anything that resembled a gun. So when we bought water guns, they were little dolphins that squirted and that sort of thing, because we didn't like the idea of having anything that was manufactured to be a gun around the place. And so they used their Tinker Toys and their Legos to make their own little guns and sticks. Everything at a certain age, everything became a gun. When they were young, our refusal to have anything that looked like a gun, just, it didn't really compute with them. By the time they were older, then they found, they found their own way. I mean, they weren't really interested in hearing our point of view. So I think if you say, on principle, we're not going to have an Xbox, and in fact, we still don't have an Xbox or a PlayStation. If you say that on principle, that's fine. That's something to respect. But in response to the idea that playing with paint guns or playing with water pistols is modeling violence, it is imagining violence as a form of play. Cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians are for active kids a form of imaginative play that helps them figure out what's appropriate and inappropriate, where social boundaries lie. It helps them deal with troubling ideas of that. It's a way of imagining scenarios that are related to things that they're likely to encounter in real life in a context that can be made safe and harmless, and I suppose in some situations could be harmful and dangerous. So it really is a question of the context. But I think that if playing paintball or laser tag or whatever it is, even though you're wearing armor and carrying guns, if it's play, particularly if it's social play, I think the fear that somehow this is going to make people, that it's going to somehow tip over or shade into aggression, I think in my mind, that likelihood is far more remote than the likelihood of someone who's playing tackle football or ice hockey, one of these sanctioned sports. I think that's far more likely to result in aggressive or violent behavior than something that is labeled and seen as play, something that's not intended to cause a hurt or harm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm listening.
I think it makes sense. I think we've been so conditioned as Mennonites and Anabaptists to that even though you show us this correlation, this studies of no real direct hard causal effect between violent entertainment and violent behavior. I think that's a hard thing for us to believe, even if it is true, even if it is absolutely true. I still think that it. I think
there's a social psychologist in Ohio who did an interesting study. He said, these violent video games, they lead to aggressive thoughts and the potential for aggressive action. So, well, what happens with Old Testament stories? So he picked one out and did the exact same studies and found out that the effects were not just the same, they were worse, because this was God-sanctioned violence. And so, well, what do you do with the Old Testament?
Boom. Yeah, that's a good question. And even I just want to mention Shannon, as she can't speak, I'll speak for her. She said, can we use these games like Paintball and Halo to demonstrate a lesson with parent consent, of course? Is it, here we go, is it that much different than playing simulation games like Persecution, which, we often play, which is, are you familiar with that, Dirk, Persecution game, which is, it's a simulation game from the Reformation that you are the Anabaptist and you are being chased, hunted down by the church authorities, and actually then try to find your way through different safe houses without getting caught by the secret police or the police, which then take you to a jail where you're yelled at, you're whatever. Good question.
The game.
Well, I'm sorry. Were you going to say something, Dirk? I am just reflecting on what you said earlier, Rachel, about, like how this sounds to us as Mennonites, like we're so conditioned, to just say no to all of it. And I found that as a parent, that simply doesn't work. It's not working.
There's nothing wrong with saying no.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when the kids ask for reasons for saying no, the idea that it's going to result in violence, I don't think is a good reason, or that imagining violence is wrong is, I don't think, a good reason either. There are, after all, violent entertainments, movies that deal with violent, like Hotel Rwanda, that depict violence in very gruesome ways, that result in empathy and understanding, that get us out of our own heads and to be able to see what the real-world consequences of violence are. So it's not imagining violence that is dangerous or harmful. It's the context in which that takes place. If you imagine biblical violence as a sort of license to do it for the Crusades, well, that's trouble. But if you're reading it to reflect in a different way about how to digest, sort of to problematize the violence in the Bible, then clearly that's a useful thing. So what I think that Mennonite parents can be afraid of violent fantasies, violent stories, imagination of violence, and if that's not discriminating, if you don't think about the context and particular kinds of or purposes of using these, then I think that's a kind of knee-jerk response that kids are going to see through. And I also think that we needn't be afraid of rough play. That is also something that can be developmentally very useful. So it's not like I'm advocating violent entertainments. As I said, we never had an Xbox in my house, and we were very shy about things that looked like guns.
How would you recommend, if I'm going to ask a question, and feel free to anyone else ask follow-up questions or any other type of question, but Dirk, what do you recommend for parents on how to help their child or for their youth kind of create that reflective environment?
teach self-control. When they get violent, you tell them that it's not appropriate. You hug them. You give them timeouts. Um, to give them space to cool down, and to say that that's what's appropriate in violent situations, to distance them from, to help them get control of their aggressive emotions. That's the most helpful thing that you can do. And maybe that's also the most helpful thing you can do for older kids, for teenage boys and 20-somethings.
Other comments? Questions? I think we keep seeing Shanna, but I think Shanna keeps getting kicked off. Are you there, Shanna, live?
Yeah, I'm still
Okay. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about? You said as a parent it's hard, and then we lost you.
Oh, I'm sorry. What I went on to say was that just putting an end to all of that or disallowing all of it doesn't work. I'm reminded of church leaders in one of our congregations once who told us that we've learned that rigid don't work. It doesn't work to be rigid. And I would say I definitely would agree with that, having raised 3 sons, that, just saying no and cutting them off doesn't work. So I like the approach that, I can navigate this with the different nuances that Dirk has shared with us, it's a better way than just saying no to all of this.
And what about looking for positive alternatives when they want to do something to help them be proactive in making good choices and making their own choices that you think are more healthy?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Right.
Maybe it's... Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and maybe it's even, that's exactly where I'm at right now with my 9-year-old, and every other weekend it's another birthday party at Laser Light, right? And he loves Laser Light and wants to have a Laser Light birthday party of his own. And, so far we've been able to sort of, encourage other types of birthday parties to have, but, what would it mean for us to maybe, play Laser Light with him, one time and have some critical discussions about, what that was like. Because Owen has told me before, he was like, it's not violent. I mean, he was saying exactly what you said, Dirk, it's not violent. I know I'm not killing people. It's fun, And so, I think it's the parent in me needing to learn that in new ways too, and being critical myself about what are healthy ways of engagement with that.
And to engage him around questions of how does, what do you learn, and what's it like for the other kids, and have you have you seen people have their feelings hurt or get left out, or those are the more salient, relevant things to talk about with kids that age, I like your idea of doing it with him, maybe in preparation for making the decision about what he will do on his birthday when it's his turn to have a birthday party.
Yeah, I really like this talk of helping to make better decisions, or helping to find ways to have positive responses. I guess I'm one of those that might be guilty of taking my whole youth group to play laser tag, and have done it a couple times. But it's interesting, the teamwork and the enjoyment that comes out of that as a result, almost team building that occurs in just a couple rounds of doing this. And I think it's because there is that relationship. There is something that's gone on there that's holding this group together. Obviously they're against each other, but they sort of form those little coalitions looking for support from others. But I think the major fear that we come up against, and I think this goes to your correlation and causation, sort of the learning experience, is kind of like, what's our first response when something doesn't go our way? And so, like, in seminary, one of the questions that was posed in a lecture was, what were our options after 9/11? And of course, this is extreme, like, sort of national response, or personal response. But kind of gauging our response to that, is the what's our first response after 9/11? Well, we could have bombed some people. We could have strengthened our borders. All these different things. But then the professor pushed us to say, how come the first thing that we didn't say was pray? How come the first thing that was missing there was to seek to help and to join with God's people in the midst of that, rather than thinking nationally, thinking on a national scale? How are our first reactions shaped? And I think I really appreciate, Dirk, how you went into this, having a discussion then about positive responses. How can we make and seek out positive responses? And I don't know if you have any resources that you would point us towards that might help in that. We have a narrative in this country of responding with force and with swiftness as being the key idea of strength. How do we encourage a different narrative of what it is to be strong in response to things that are outside of our desires?
Yeah, it's interesting that is a very heady discussion that takes place in Sunday school classes and MYF discussions, but it's so remote from games and movies that that's a sort of deliberate thing that comes out of Bible studies and looking at politics and the news. But I don't think that it necessarily arises from paintball. And since you've had I'm from laser tag, rather, and since you've had some experience to laser tag, how would you respond to Randy's concern?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for me, the reason why I stick away from paintball is because there is actual harm that can happen and that does happen, and I think there is a level of that. I think of laser tag being more like tag that you would play, in a playground. You're just tapping somebody. In this case, there's no physical contact. Yeah, I think what you said about sort of intent, the malicious intent, is a big piece that I would be concerned more about in any situation, whether it be tag on the playground or all the way at paintball or whatever. That is a big difference. But I guess my level of concern is how are we shaping our first response to things, and how do we shape that well? That sort of knee-jerk reaction. Is our knee-jerk reaction to punch the person next to us, or is that knee-jerk reaction to do something different?
Well, playing laser tag, I think it's against the rules to punch other people, right? Yeah, I've only played laser tag once, and I can tell you that violence was the farthest thing from my mind. I was just trying to hide. So that I think that there's a kind of slippage that people, Mennonites, often make between actual violence and imaginary violence, or pretend violence, or make-believe violence. They're different things, and I think we have to remember that. There's also another kind of slippage that suggests that somehow imaginary violence leads to actual violence, and that's clearly not the case. There is a connection between ideas, but these ideas, entertaining violence, can actually be a way of thinking about violence, of imagining, of empathizing what the victims of violence feel like, of imagining, of feeling the excitement about violence, and still recognizing that in a situation like backyard football or laser tag, you have to moderate your responses. You have to be aware of how other people are feeling. You can't, in a situation like rough play, you do wind up in situations where you see how other people feel when they get hurt. You find out what kind of responses are appropriate. You find out where your limits are and where other people's limits are. You learn how to interact in social situations. So I guess I would ask, is it play? And if it's play, what can we do to make sure that the play is healthy? Those are the two, rather than saying, oh, it's violence, oh, it looks like a gun, it's a horrible thing. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. Play is healthy. Not all play is, but if we start out supposing that there are, that good play, interactive play, is almost always necessary for healthy social development, healthy psychological development, for learning self-control, for learning one's limits, then I think we'll be a lot less fearful of simply entertaining violence, of simply seeing it on the screen.
I think that was a really good way to conclude what you were saying, and inviting us to consider regarding viewing violent entertainment and how it impacts our youth. So, are there any final thoughts or comments anyone has to make? I see our time is up. If not, Dirk, thank you so much again. It was a very, very enlightening discussion, and your 5 points, your 5 facts of entertaining violence, I think will give us a lot of food for thought here in the days and the months to come. So grateful for you coming and sharing your wisdom here with the Gathering Place, and thank you all for taking an hour out of your day to talk with one another about this. And so, until next time, peace to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.